Recording. All right. So you'd like 5 minutes to go through your case study?
Yes, please.
Okay. First thing to say is if you are playing the game, you're using the assessment from the main study guide. But anyone who's listening in who's not playing the game will want to use the alternative assessment because it's not going to it won't make any sense to you if you haven't been playing along. So everyone has the choice of which assessment to do, but if you haven't been playing along from week to week, there's no point in doing the original assessment topic. If you are doing that one, you'll notice each week we've got hotspots popping up that have a set of resources that are required, a result, a very short description, and a link to a news article on it. This assignment is about you thinking about creating your own hotspot that will be added to the bank of ones if this subject was to ever run again. It would add to the bank that I would be rolling out each week. And it's to take an issue that's got some criminal justice impact, but it doesn't have to be like a direct crime thing, because as we're doing this term, like all those areas interlock and overlap so much. But to then look at it, well, what assets would be required to be expended to resolve it, and what assets would someone get as a reward for successfully completing it. And then probably the most important piece is the reflection on, which is just you thinking about the way in which you can model social problems within a sort of simple set of rules. Because obviously social problems require a lot more than just saying, well, I'm going to put two intelligence and one one well-being into solving this problem. It's more complicated than that. But I would say for your assignment, pick something that requires assets from multiple types of asset, because that gives you then the opportunity to talk about interagency cooperation and to say, one of the reasons why this problem is a problem and it's been reported on in the news is that it requires cooperation, and there's reasons why cooperation isn't forthcoming. And it requires these agencies to actually get together and form a strategy. So my recommendation would be not to pick one that's like a low-level one that requires sort of just 5 of one asset. Pick one of the high, and there should be in the a guideline as to the game rules as to how to set these up. I hope in there somewhere on the assignment. I would pick one that requires multiple stats, and that just gives you an opportunity to talk about that area of collaboration and cooperation. So there's nothing mysterious or hidden, I don't think, about it. Happy to answer questions about it.
Just going to be honest, I forgot we had it because I was focused on my other one.
One quick question, if that's all right. When it's talking about examples online to look at how it's presented, we're not too concerned about the quality of the source, hey? Like we can use a news article like you have?
Yeah. Yes. And in fact, that would give you, if you had one of the Melbourne news items about African gangs, that would give you something else to talk about in the reflective piece about the way the media misrepresents groups in society and how, it's not just a case of getting more police intelligence on the African gangs that don't exist, that the media is reporting about.
Yeah, I'm not even going to count it, but like 21st attempt that someone's tried to get into my house. I can't even call them break-ins anymore because they're not damaging much anymore. But yeah, so maybe like the youth crime in far north Queensland, how everyone's saying that it's ramped up because the children that were doing it just got let out of juvie. We can have a little moral panic about these tiny little kids that literally they're so small. If they turn sideways, you can't even see them. Like they are.
Yes.
Some of them are adorable. They're adorable when they're not trying to break into my house,
Yes.
So yeah, that could be cool. Nice little lived experience thing. Bit boring, but
And yeah, it's one of those things that, like, instead of it requiring intelligence assets to solve, it probably requires welfare assets. That's probably, and a bit of a chord in terms of like making sure the community isn't just running away with a moral panic. So yeah, I mean, the core of this assessment task, apart from giving me more ammunition to put into the game, is to think about the way in which we model social problems and the way in which we model them in simulations, because there are always going to be simplifications. There's always going to be ways in which to solve a problem you've got to simplify. But often we simplify way too much. You know, when we like to talk about the youth problem, we do that all the time. We say, oh, youth problem. Like, every one of them is individual, distinct, and unique in their own ways. But we can't manage all those youths as individual, distinct people. We've got to try and find what are the aggregate things that they have in common, and then how do we solve those problems. So there's a bit of a philosophy of science thing here, in terms of how do we problem solve in social science, and how, do we go through this process of defining, putting things into groups, putting things into categories.
Actually, I got a couple of points in my report for my other subject. The restorative justice I could bring across here.
Why not? Kill two birds
that'll
with one.
save you so much time too.
Well, what Scott was just
Sucks, I
talking,
should've
I'm
done
like, I put that in my conclusion. That's in one of my paragraphs on my report. I just submitted.
Yeah, I mean, it's not self-plagiarism if the unit coordinator knows, right? It's just collaboration.
It's the same unit coordinator. So
That self-plagiarism thing is such a pile of shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yourself.
I've had my future sister-in-law soon. Yeah, she got called into the uni for self-plagiarism when she was doing her degree. Most beautiful soul ever, like, would be doing everything by the book. And I'm like, how can you self-plagiarize? Like, you have a specific way of talking. If you change it too much, they'll think that you're hitting up ChatGPT. If you don't change it enough, you get done for self-plagiarism. But yeah, went in, had a meeting, and it was literally all good. But the amount of stress that she would have been going through leading up to that, with academic integrity and all of that, wild. But yeah, definitely, if you can, save yourself the mental load and do it. I've done it for criminology before.
And if there is a problem because there's assignments in two subjects that are identical that you can, like, use the same assignment for, that's not the student's problem. Honestly, I can understand students being frustrated and going, well, this is the same assignment I did in this subject, I can use the same one again. But then to turn around and go, well, no, you can't do that, you've got to write. Yeah, it's crazy. Particularly when you've got students just, buying assignments using contract cheating all over the place. Why are we wasting energy on self-plagiarism? I've got no idea.
Have you actually seen that?
Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to go buy a. Not that I want to. I wouldn't even know how to go and pay someone to buy one like that.
They'd be blackmailing me left, right, and center. I could just imagine it, like, especially us in criminology, right? We're method acting a little bit here if we do contract cheating and stuff, right? And then you start getting good, you make a name for yourself, someone Googles you and things come up that you're in, like, a decent position. And they're like, remember these undergrad assignments that you paid us for? We want triple the money right now, please, thanks. Like, yeah, wild.
I haven't heard of that happening, but I like the fact that your brain goes in that direction. It shows that you've been listening.
We were actually taught that in steps, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
One of the consequences, one of the side effects.
It's like the vice chancellor's recording being like, don't do this because it's only going to get worse. And I'm like, I've heard of so many people doing their undergrad degree back in the day when you had to actually attend libraries and they'd hide books from each other so they couldn't find the sources. They'd, like, plagiarize so much more because it was a hard copy and stuff like that. Like, we already had our work cut out for us because of Turnitin, all right? Let alone making it any more difficult and having someone else do the assessment and then having to deal with the fallout of that. Like, it's wild.
Then again, if you're a vice chancellor, one of the former vice chancellors of Monash, you get done for plagiarism yourself. one of the previous ones, just his PhD was entirely plagiarized. I don't know why he thought no one would ever find that out, but they did.
Reading the articles for my report for restorative justice, they were like referencing themselves from their old reports. And I'm like, their old journal articles. I'm like, well, this is interesting.
Well, that's how you get your citations up, is you reference yourself.
An older report, or, you know, there's this person and this person's doing this report, but this person has a report over here. So we're just going to reference that. And then this person did a report with somebody else over here. So we'll just reference that one too. I'm like, oh, this hurts my head.
Yeah. I mean, one of the ways, if you guys ever want to be an academic, one of the ways to be successful is to become an expert on one subject and just publish on that subject over and over and over again. Because you can churn out the articles and look very productive that way. Not very interesting.
Well, things update every so many years.
Yeah, well, I knew a guy, he's retired now, who's in law, whose speciality was one group of defenses to homicide. And he kept publishing on that for years, and then they repealed all the laws and I thought, well, he's not going to be able to nope, he kept publishing on the fact that the laws had been repealed. Well done.
Would that bringing it to our concepts of criminology, and I can't say it right, homogeneous. Well, yeah, thanks. That, right? So, like, if you're like one good person and you've gotten to the level where you're actually teaching other academics and they're now up to your level and doing things in their own little parts of the field, you've got a group of people that probably won't challenge you because they know you, and you're like the leading expert on something, but you don't have other people challenging it that don't know you either, right? So what happens if this one person is misunderstood and has been like disseminating something that's actually fundamentally wrong at the time or later proven to be wrong, and then has I guess hamstrung the progression of the science, whatever research they're in. Like, it would just be, one, boring, and two, like, I don't want to read the same stuff from the same person all the time. I love when they have like academically written like slogs at each other. It's great.
This is the argument in favor of blind peer reviewing on journals, is the idea that people shouldn't be able to get stuff published just because they're the expert in the field, and that then and equally they should be fearless in publishing things that like young upstarts are publishing, because no one knows who they are. But the reality is, when someone's a leader in the field and they put something into a journal, everyone knows it's theirs. So the blind peer review thing does not work as a check and balance on power. You know, I've even been in a position where I was on an editorial board of a journal and I rejected something that was put in, and the rest of the panel said, "But don't you know who that is?" And it's like, "Of course I don't. This is the whole point of blind peer reviews. I'm not supposed to know who it is." And they said, "Oh, this person's, you know, a luminary. We can't not publish it." It's like, well, why did I spend all the time doing the critical review and pointing out all the problems in this paper if you're just going to publish it anyway? Yeah, anyway. Don't get me started.
My friend's an actual scientist. As a scientist with toxins. Scientist in a lab. And she had someone send her their article because she has PhD students that she looks after as well. And they referenced one of her papers and they referenced it incorrectly. And she could not get a hold of this person to tell them, "You have referenced me incorrectly. Take it out. I don't want my name associated with this." It was a whole thing. She's like, "You clearly did not read my paper. I can tell you've just looked for that. That's what fit in your paper, but it's incorrect." I'm like, oh.
If your feedback is really specific about what that person got wrong on that paper, it looks really much like you're not anonymous anymore. It becomes really clear it's you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Emma saying, I think she got feedback from someone and they'd asked her to put in more citations for different articles, but it was to the same person. So she knew that they must have been, or, you know, associated with this author. But yeah, it's wild. Like, oh
Yeah.
man, I like, on the purpose of the recording, we're here just like, you know, this is what happens when you put a bunch of people like that are academics that know how to think critically, they start thinking critically about the institutions that they're in. Like, it's thankfully, I feel like that's a really good sign of the fact that you know, Australia does actually let us have opinions and explore things, which is great. But I just thought, for the sake of the fact that we've only got 40 minutes left and we've
Yes.
only really spoken about the assignment that all of us here are attending live are doing, to confirm, like, if I've got any questions later during break week, or if any of the students that are doing the alternative assessment do, can we like post in the Q&A forum, and then potentially have like a little, I don't know, a little Q&A video. I've seen them more so like when we've made common mistakes, like if that sort of stuff. Just so for those of us that tend to procrastinate or are doing the other assessment, maybe we've got something to loop back onto, just in case it's needed.
Teams is the best place to post.
Oh yeah, Teams. That's right. There's not even a Q&A forum for this subject anymore.
No, I took it down because it's broken. Yeah, the Moodle forum stuff is just so broken. And Teams was better, but Teams has gone hinky as well now.
Well, Teams is trash in one sense, that if something's going to go down, it'll be Teams first, well before Moodle. So like, I don't know if everyone else does the same thing of like copying the Zoom links and having them just in a document. So if something goes down, we can still actually access a session. But the first thing that goes down for me always is Teams. And so sometimes I'll get a notification on my phone that I can't access because it wants me to put like the staff email and everything on my phone. And no, I'd rather not have to second guess the dumb brain rot stuff that I'm sending my housemate. And so like, I know you guys are trying to get a hold of me, or something important is happening, and then I can't access it. So it's lose-lose situation. This is why we're in the social sciences and not computer sciences, because I ain't bothering with technology anymore at all.
I guess I should also make a quick note on the sim, the stuff that's been set up for this week. I need to get the budget bids. I've got them for admin and advocacy. I need the budget bids for the other groups before we can go forward.
Oh, well, then you haven't updated the town hall or something, because it must still have last week's, because it's got admin, advocacy. Order of play. They're the words I want.
Okay, I've taken out the values, but maybe I just left in the order of play.
I'll go first.
I was like, Carly got in with a cheap shot again.
Oh, I wasn't even a cheap shot. I just got so nervous that I was going to end up like waiting and then forgetting about it. Like, I've got to strike while the iron's hot. So I was like, no, I'll get in there. I'll get it finished, you know, before even like 5 o'clock last Friday. And then as it turns out, I do have COVID. So I was there when I said in the chat, like, oh, I'm glad that these unis are quiet. Like, I've got a scratchy feeling in my throat. So after that, I just instantly just flatlined, and now I'm catching up. So I'm happy to go first again, but I really don't mind.
Okay,
I won't dog shot anyone.
The order I've got it is admin, advocacy, welfare, and enforcement. It's the order. And I'll update the doc.
Well, you'll just have to change third and fourth. They're switched this week.
The one thing that's new that's in your playbooks is this is the first crisis week. There are 3 crisis points in the game. And they have a big impact on the town scores. And you can make a choice between 3 different options at this point of how you want to proceed. You have to spend 5 assets of any type, internal or external, if you want to get the benefit of your choice. So your choice counts even if you don't spend it, but if you want to get the benefit of the spend on your where it is in your playbook, highlight the one you want and say, I'm going to take XXXX off to do it. And that'll put you on. There's like different story paths for each of those. So there's a lot of different ones to choose from.
Is that a unanimous decision that we have to make, or is it different for each of the 4 of us?
It's different for each of the 4 of you. There's a different storyline for each group.
And our spending, we should wait until after this week's play so we can see what extra we've got to spend.
You could do that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I keep forgetting we're kind of splitting our sim month over the 2 weeks with the Friday. Yep, okay. Yeah, that's a really good idea, Steph.
I can get it quite
I
a
had a
bit.
quick look before class today, and I've made notes for myself. And then because you just mentioned that, so I was like, ooh.
Cool.
Mm.
Let's talk about the workshop for today. I don't think we've now sort of chewed into the time to complete it, but that's not really a problem. The topic for this week is focusing on the and the reading on the collaboration between private organisations um, and government. And this has been a big push from neoliberal governments. And it's this idea that if we want money to have something fixed, then we go to the people who have the money. And I remember a few years ago, Elon Musk saying pretty much the same thing, that he doesn't like paying tax because he doesn't think it should go to undeserving people. But if there are social problems, government should just ask billionaires to solve them. And, he's a self-proclaimed genius. So obviously that's the way things are done. So
Isn't he like old mate with the Thailand and like the cave thing? And he had some harebrained idea, and the government were just like, bro, like settle down, like
yeah,
chill.
and he called the guy who was doing the rescue a pedophile for no apparent reason, but just because they didn't want his help. Then he then on Twitter called the guy a pedophile. Yeah,
Wow.
right. Yeah, you're obviously the person to solve the world's problems. So yeah, there is obviously a flaw in the plan of saying any social problems we have are best solved by business and commercial interests. But often it's a really pragmatic thing, and particularly when we talk about things that are linked to economic development. So the scenario this week talks about the sort of the bad area of town at the docks. And this is a very common idea, is you have development corporations who cooperate with government to redevelop sites and to make them, obviously strategically place all the people who are part of the consortium in terms of profiting from the sites. But it also means that you've got these sort of crime-ridden eyesores that are full of, homeless people live there or whatever, that you can demolish and get people out of there. So a lot of the focus of criminology, really, in general, through the 20th century was clear out the slums, get people out of the slums, tear down the slums and give them something better. And that was how we ended up with things like those big tower blocks, social housing. We have some in Melbourne. You probably don't have them in North Queensland. But one of the famous ones was Cabrini Green in Chicago. And it became horrific really quickly. So it was better that at the start, it was better than the slums that it replaced. But it was cheaply built, massive tower block. There was no design in the way community functioned, and it soon got taken over by gangs and the poverty. If you've ever seen the horror film Candyman from the late 80s, here's some homework for you. It was set in Cabrini Green while it was still existing. So Candyman is about this sort of folk devil. If you say his name, he appears. It's actually really good film. I really love it. Anyway, they actually set the movie in Cabrini Green. So it's probably the best chance to look at what it looked like at the worst of its decline. In terms of like there just being holes in the wall. Yeah, they actually the film paid a whole lot of guys who were hanging around to be extras in the film, and it turned out they were the gangs that were basically running the place. So when you see the guys being menacing and being gang-like in the film, they actually are the gangsters that were there. Anyway, they tore Cabrini Green down, which was about all you could do with it, and it's now entirely gentrified. And the recent Candyman remake film is set in the same place in the gentrified area. So if you've got any interest or tolerance for horror films, Candyman and the remake of Candyman, I've never seen the Candyman 2, 3, and 4, the sequels. They're probably awful. But as for criminologists, It's a really interesting, just having a look at the space that it's in and realizing this isn't sets. This is something built. They just walked in and filmed in this actual housing development that was designed to prevent crime. And you can see how well it turned out. So there was a lot of focus in 20th century criminology on slums as a cause of crime. It's almost like crime just comes out of the slums. And the idea that if you built people apparently nice housing, and this stuff was pretty grim even when it was new. It was all sort of Besser block apartments. And you know, we've got a couple of them here in Melbourne. You see a lot of them in British movies and TV. Actually, another film recommendation, Attack the Block, is set in a British tower block with a group of young hoodlums who are fighting back against an alien invasion. Yeah, Housing Commission in Australia is like, I think it's better because it actually sort of emulates suburban housing, even if it's built cheaply and not administered properly. Because at least you're not sort of 16 stories up in a tower block. But yeah, it's the same. You get exactly the same problems with Housing Commission areas, is that you actually concentrate all the problems in one area. Toronto's done actually a really good thing where they've got public housing where you have to apply to be in that housing, and they make sure they split income levels in this social housing. So it's all in the city around Toronto, and they have professionals, they have unemployed people, they have migrants, they have artists, and they actually have it's very Canadian. They have this program where they actually mix people and create these mixed communities around their social housing. And it works really well. But taking all the people who've got problems with poverty, putting them in one place, stunningly enough, it makes a worse problem. But you know,
I have a question about that.
Yep.
Sorry, I thought you'd finished talking, my bad. So like, this is like social disorganization theory, right? And so like, yeah, does that mean, say, for example, when you have the media talking about African gangs, and I see often, because my family are from the western suburbs of Sydney, people that look like me no longer live in the western suburbs of Sydney. You know, they talk about like Lebanese, and I think there's another like ethnicity, and they like fight with each other and everything. So is there a way to actually say, you know, having a multicultural, different socioeconomic status, yada, 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 all mixed together, being that it is better, how would you approach trying to say that and present it to somewhere like Parramatta, where you're starting to see really clear dividing lines between, I guess, different demographics, without it coming across like you're being incredibly racist, like a lot of the media articles do?
Yeah, this is, I mean, hats off for Toronto for actually like getting ahead of the curve on it, because it's hard to do once it's become entrenched. And in fact, this is the idea of ghettoization that goes back to, you know, the Jewish communities in the medieval times. The idea that particularly if you're a group in society that is discriminated against, or you don't have the same language as everyone else, it's quite natural for everyone to settle in the same area. But the problem with that is that then gets seen as a problem in the rest of society, because you don't go to the ghetto, and I'm pretty sure the original ghetto was a Jewish community. That was where the word came from. But you see the same thing, I mean, with the Chinese diaspora. They've actually managed quite well, because you've got Chinatowns all over the world, and people generally are kind of happier with Chinatowns. They're like, oh, it's kind of ethnic flavor or whatever. But in San Francisco in the early days, they actually mowed down the entire Chinatown and forced it to relocate because it was on really good land. So Chinatowns haven't always been successful. But yeah, you end up and Sydney, I think, is a really good example of where you get these different community ghettos. You've got racism from wider society and between the different groups, and you just create this pressure pot of conflict within the community. And you know, in some ways, it's really natural that if your cousin lives somewhere and you come and you know move to the area, you want to live near your cousin. People do that. I wouldn't, but people do that. So it's, you know, it's just racist to criticize people for doing it, because they come into the country and all they do is gather together and they talk their own language and whatever else. And it's like, well, you look at some of the spots in London that have like Australian bartenders, like all the Australians sort of tend to settle in the same area as well. It's just not seen in the same way, and it doesn't lead to the same kind of criminogenic outcomes, because you don't, that I know of. I don't know that there's Australian organised crime in London. Who knows, with UK being on fire, and all the right-wing gangs, like, it's just crazy. I don't even want to think. I can't even think about that one. But in Australia, I think the western suburbs are a great example of where those ghettos have taken control. You end up with organised crime, like street level organised crime in those ghettos, and it becomes really difficult to break that. And it's also, you know, it's part of the cause is the racism in the wider community, but there's also severe racism between the different communities. And you know, when you get Islamophobia chucked in there as well, you've yeah, and Stephanie says the expat people all around the world. You know, you go to people, Papua New Guinea, you go to Morocco, you've got the sort of English expats in those areas. So it's a big social problem. And often what we do is we just try and kick all the people who we see as a problem out and move them. And that's kind of what's happened with, you know, with Sydney, as we just keep pushing, as we gentrify the suburbs, we just keep pushing people who were, like, Glebe was once, you know, the radical bohemian heart of Sydney, because the housing was really cheap, it was really run down, and you had lots of artists and people from different ethnic communities in Glebe. Suddenly Glebe is multiple $1 million to buy a place there, and anyone who was living there gets pushed out, because they were probably renting, they probably weren't buying. They get pushed further out. And I think with Sydney, we've sort of pushed up against the Blue Mountains, and we've pushed people as far as we can go. And there's some series of developments that are on a floodplain that are now a problem, because they've then spilled over into this other area, but it all goes underwater every time it rains for more than 2 days at a go. Another one of those complex problems where your social planning just leads to more problems, because you haven't actually dealt with the root causes. So in terms of the scenario for this week, Blyton's got the bad area, which is the docks. It's perceived by everyone to be a bad area because there's graffiti on the walls, buildings are empty, broken, run down, whatever else. And we've got a consortium of business people who are forming an alliance with the town council to turn this into a profit-making exercise. So this sort of helps you. For this week, you're actually playing the bad guys. You've seen the Mitchell and Webb thing with the Nazis, where they realize they're the baddies because they've got skulls on their hats. This week, you're taking on the role of these sinister property developers who are looking at a way to sort of screw the rest of the town, but pretend they're doing something which is really benevolent, and to look at the way in which you present this profiteering in a way that looks like you're being really generous and, you know, magnanimous to the people. If we had enough people to be playing the full game, this group is one of the part of the alliance that the Trader Group serves. There's a series of different criminal organizations in Blyton, and this property development group are part of that. So if we were playing with like full 20 or so people, there would be sort of four or five people around who were playing this would go, oh, this is my group that I can't tell anyone about. But you know, we're not doing that. There's two old families in Blyton. One was the original sort of colonial masters who were the rich yacht club people, and another is a group of people who were the lackeys and servants of that group, whose family are now sort of a group of thugs and rabble rousers. There's the biker gang, and there's someone else who are all kind of tied into this network of crime. Okay, so a few issues that come out of this activity is to think about, oh, that's the other group, the Sons of the Southern Cross, the racist group who are just saying they're nationalists and they believe in good Australian values, but as plots develop, you'll find that they are also connected to the biker group and they're connected to the old money organization. There's all sorts of conspiracies all over the place.
Is there actual links in? I can't find them. Sorry, this may be a little sidetrack. But the Sons of the Southern Cross, because they're an actual group. Is there links to their problems in Blyton, or is it just like sheer coincidence that the Blyton ones link up to an actual real group?
Is there when I wrote this, there wasn't a group called that.
Okay, no. So there is a legitimate motorcycle club called the Sons of the Southern Cross, and I worked in a motorcycle workshop with those boys. So when I read the Blyton issue with the Sons of the Southern Cross, my mind has been an absolute meltdown because I can't find. I was like, has Scott found like a news article that specifically links up, which is why he used these, and I couldn't find anything. So you've got all these, and these boys are like the absolute sweetest, and I'm reading the stuff that you've got listed for the Blyton, and I'm like, oh my God, what has Scott found that I don't know? So I was like, can I just butt in and ask, like, did you just fluke this, or?
Was a fluke. I searched when I wrote this. I searched for that name, and I could not find anything. And maybe they're not online, but I couldn't find any group by that name. Obviously, at some point, I'll need to change it. Because I'm certainly not meaning to suggest that just being in a biker group is criminal or deviant or anything like that. There's plenty of people in biker groups that are there for perfectly good reasons, and you know, not all of them are making amphetamines on the side or setting fire.
No, these ones aren't making amphetamines. They've got a little Facebook page. I don't know if you can see it, but they do like they're almost like charity live music events from the Toe Balls Bar. Live music. They're so cute.
I'm definitely
like, it is adorable. It is a bunch of grown men. I kid you not. They're like 6 foot and taller, the biggest, burliest things you're ever gonna find. And I just walk past them all the time. I'm like, you're like a little duckling. Like they just go everywhere together. They're so sweet. So when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, these people that I'm looking at that I think are adorable are actually horrible people, and I have like missed something.
No.
I mean, I've had that happen. I was like family friends with this guy who we knew he was like a bikie, but not super bad type situation. And we kind of thought maybe he was laundering money through, and that's how we knew him, was through this sport that I used to be in. Yeah. And then as it turns out, he was like decently up in one. Yeah, they can be really lovely people, just when they're sober, I'd imagine, and when you're not on their bad side. But yeah, no, Sons of the Southern Cross look cool. Have a little look on Facebook. They look really wholesome.
But my apologies to them for picking the same name. And yeah, look, this is something I did some work with the Hells Angels back in the 90s, and at that point I think the Hells Angels have gotten a bit sort of harder now, but at that point the Hells Angels were all dentists for some reason, and they'd all kind of, you know, gotten older, quite a lot older, and they were all kind of, you know, fairly settled down. Steph points out that there's a link between bikies and military vets, and yeah, the disservice we do to vets means that people find support where they can, and often that can end up in things like bikie gangs, and that can end up in bad bikie gangs as well. And that's a function of, like, I mean, this is total side topic, but the horrendous suicide rate we have amongst Australian veterans, and the sort of struggle to find anyone who sort of cares about it. So
That's
yeah,
wild. You imagine being a vet and then, sorry, again, cutting you off. Imagine being like a veteran, right? Come back to Australia, yada yada, did your business in Afghanistan or wherever, became a blackie because no one was really listening to you and stuff. And then you were doing it during the time of Campbell Newman, where he went like after went after the blackies, like I've heard over in psychology with the KPIs he put on hospitals, like people essentially died because of his practices, and how tight everything was getting run. Man, you'd really hate the government, I could imagine. Yeah, that would be wild. I didn't know that they were military veterans, because the person that I'm thinking of is around that area, not a veteran at all. But yeah, that's wild. I had no idea.
The
No,
RSL,
our three here are specifically military. Some are still serving in the military. So they're even their names are military based. So they're specifically military. There are other clubs. They're motorcycle clubs up here, not gangs. The gangs got pushed out. They're elsewhere. But the clubs, the motorcycle clubs, are military based, and there's like an all girls one as well, and there's another one.
that's cool.
Yeah.
I
So
know from one thing I know from a previous is that the RSL is dominated by baby boomer Vietnam era people, and they're not very nice to people who've served since Vietnam. So I can see why, if they were going to go to the authentic part of society, go to the RSL for support, they're treated pretty badly by the RSL.
I know the RSL is supposed to be military based, but I don't know how many ex-military are actually working there. Yeah, Michaela's got it.
Really love to do like a whole unit on motorcycle clubs.
I did it as my assessment for one of Emma's classes.
I reckon, yeah, it'd be absolutely fascinating because there's a whole history too.
If you ever did it though, can I just 100% recommend reach out to the clubs? Like if you ever found a way to get it worked in, reach out to them and get them to talk, because the issue is the military motorcycle clubs actually have to answer to the 1%er clubs. Like they are all completely linked, and listening to the boys in the military clubs, the way they explain it, because it's such a fine line that they have to teeter to make sure that they don't, if they do anything wrong or they toe out a line, they can lose their benefits, their jobs, so the way they explain it is far better than any research that you can locate. Like if you ever find a way, I definitely recommend reaching out to the boys to explain it, because the knowledge that they have there, it's actually really interesting to see how the 1%ers link up with the military ones, and they're not actually bad people. They just do bad stuff. If that's
Well, that's the fascinating thing about it, and any kind of study of subculture and gangs. Look at the history of the triads. In Australia, it goes back to the goldfields, and when the Anglo miners would just go and beat up the Chinese miners and take all their gold. There's a whole history around the triads that is about people supporting each other and protecting themselves from other people. So, yeah, it's the whole getting into those other cultures. I mean, criminology has been sort of snipped now, so the chances of actually developing this sort of stuff is very low. But still, would be a really fun thing to do. And as you said, getting the actual people to speak. And it's probably easier than a classroom, because I'm pretty sure you can blur someone out on Zoom and distort their voice if they really don't want to speak in a way that's recorded or public or whatever. It's easier to do that on Zoom than it would be to have someone in the classroom doing that. But yes, I'm going to have to come up with some more obscure name for the Sons of the Southern Cross too, so I don't end up accidentally defaming someone. And in terms of this development, we've got this fictional racist group actually applying pressure to say that whatever the development of this new Dockland experience is they want it to reflect genuine Australian culture and Australian values, which is probably going to be sort of colonial values. So particularly from the advocacy perspective, there's that question of how do you negotiate this stuff? Do you just do what the, too many groups, particularly like the American Democrats would do, is you just label these people racists and exclude them from the conversation, like they do with people in the South? It's like anyone in the South wants to talk about the Confederacy, it's like, you're a racist and you're just a Nazi and you just get excluded from the conversation. And it's like, well, there are obviously really big problems with the Confederacy and what the Confederacy stands for, but just labeling people racists out of hand is why you've got, those divisions in America such as they are now. So do you have a way of keeping everyone involved without it turning into a fight between all the factions as to, we're going to put a mural on the building, and everyone wants to have a different thing. The Sons of the Southern Cross people might want to have, a big mural of Gallipoli or something. But there might be other groups in society, in the culture community, who think that's inappropriate for like a community social space. And we're seeing a lot of that with what's happening all around the world in terms of statues of colonial figures. We had Queen Victoria's head cut off. It was James Cook's head got cut off down here in Melbourne on Australia Day. Queen Victoria just got red paint thrown all over her. So this representation of culture in public places is a big deal for a lot of people. I mean, what's wrong with James Cook? Just because you sexually assault a few teenage girls? Why do people who read history think you're a bad person? Because you're the Jeffrey Epstein of the...
Here I was thinking it was because he landed here and took their land.
That's part of it.
No. So I know little bits and pieces. So when he landed, he let like the local Aboriginal people think that he was like a god, or I think it was the southern time he landed. He let the people think that he was a god, even though he clearly knew he wasn't, so that they could go and absolutely just, I was about to say the home way of saying, have a lot of fun with all of like the local women, made them sick, took like a bunch of food and that sort of stuff, but when it came to like the actual colonization part of stuff, like when you learn about it at school, it's just, he just discovered Australia, and like, he wasn't, I guess, doing the bad stuff, like he wasn't doing the paperwork to exterminate local Aboriginal people and that sort of stuff. But I mean, heck, it worked. I didn't even know my grandparents were stolen generation until they died. So it definitely works, the policies, unfortunately. But yeah, what's his name? Thomas, James, whatever. We used to have like a concrete one here and it moved. And then I think as soon as they moved it, it like fell apart and stuff. But we had the one that was really controversial. Sorry, I know this is getting recorded, because his arm's out like that. So I'll see if I can get a photo and send it to you guys. But ours was really controversial for that. Yeah. I mean, dude was having a terrible time when he came up this way, though. Like the things that he's named local landmarks and stuff, I think you've got like, it's like Misery, like everything else. Like he was just having a rough time.
I love Australian names. Desolation Bay.
Yeah. It's all that. Even like Cape Tribulation, like that sounds so cool. It's such a beautiful place when you know it, and then you realize what the word you're saying is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had a rough time, and I think he brought some of it on himself for sure. But I never knew that you could call him the Jeffrey Epstein of colonial England.
I think that's why he got speared in Hawaii. Actually, was some retribution for things he'd done to the teenage girls in the area, or younger than teenage girls. But people say there were different times. We had different values.
I mean, honestly, if people led with that, you wouldn't even have to have the argument about how bad settler colonialism was. If people led with that, like I'm sure we can all agree nowadays that's worse, right? Even when you're talking about the people that put paint on Queen Victoria, there's this little thing in the back of my head that goes, yeah, but like I feel like I can't outwardly speak against colonialism because I clearly benefited from it. You know, imagine like the other whatever percent of my family history, obviously the majority, was over in England. You know, it's raining, it's cold, they were poor, they stole something probably, I don't know. Um, yeah, so I'm like, damn, like I'm criticizing something that I've benefited from. Like,
You're allowed to. In fact, it's
yeah,
very
so
important that people benefit from it, criticize it.
But also it was years and years and years ago.
Yeah, well, this is where your generational, in terms of generational trauma and generational disadvantage, has become a new discourse, because again, it's that question of, well, the, you don't, people who are sensible don't want people who have benefited to go around, you know, with a black armband and apologize to everyone about their privilege. But they at least expect people to be conscious of their privilege and not to, you know, not to go and, you know, mansplain everything to people who are suffering from this generational privilege. And it's part of that, you know, really problematic post-colonial problems we have all around the world. And, you know, this is relevant to the topic, you know, including Blyton, including the fictional plays, is we've got these groups who have benefited one way or another from oh my God. Oh, the posture is fantastic. It's not even like a really natural kind of yeah, it's very stiff.
if you guys watching at home want to know what I've just sent, just Google Captain Cook statue cans. It's the first image. Like bro's pulling some 1940s postures. That's for sure.
He's not looking out, look, oh, I'm looking to see a mountain out there that I'll call Mount Crapulus. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wild.
Okay, so anyway, if you want to do this one as your write-up, there's sort of some different issues and ideas to go into, but the core basis of all this is to think about the reading from this week in terms of those public-private alliances, and to think about, you know, what are the pros and cons? Because the pros are, to be honest, the government doesn't have a lot of money for development, and if you can actually get business interests on side and collaborating, it can be really good. You can end up with a development where they're making money from it, but not at someone else's expense. And you can end up with a crappy old rundown part of town revitalized and turned into something new. The problem is you've got to be so careful as to what you allow. And I think I might have mentioned in the readings this week, in the Portland Development Corporation, I think it has its own police. So you've got these really weird issues around sovereignty. I think it's Portland, where they've got their own security people that are basically sovereign police who can actually exclude the city police from their development area. They're like Docklands area. So you end up with really weird inter-organizational stuff, particularly in the US, because you can basically have these little sovereign areas like Disney, in Orlando, in Florida, they've got like the Disney suburbs that basically run under Disney law. Yeah, they have their own fire people and they have everything, and they're feuding with Ron DeSantis because he doesn't like Disney because there's been a couple of gay characters in Disney movies, and DeSantis passed the whole "don't say gay" law stuff, and on and on and on it goes. But yeah, at the core of this is this really weird stuff that basically Disney got kind of a pseudo sovereignty over this area, that they built these model gated communities. And you get that increasingly, I mean, you get it a lot in the US, but we're getting it increasingly now. We're getting these kind of corporate communities where people who live there sign away some of their civil rights. So There was a big write-up recently in the papers about people who spend all their money buying into these communities and then can't get out because you've got to like get approval of the community to who you sell your property to, because you don't want to
like retirement villages.
No, I think this was an actual like I think these were older people, but I think this was like a gated community, and they have rules about who can't sell to, and if you try to sell your place and they don't approve of them, you can be locked into this place and not be able to escape. But in America, their gated communities are even madder. Like the stuff that there's a special John Oliver did, I think, on gated communities like a year ago, I think, but he actually looked at some of the like the rules and how if you kept running up all these fees to these gated communities, they could sell your house on you, and they could sell it to like one of the members of the board. And there was people who like bought a house for $5 because the person who was who owned the house, in inverted commas, couldn't afford to pay all their fees, property fees, and there's someone on the board just bought it at an auction for no money. So yeah, there's really weird stuff when you start to mess around with land and sovereignty. Like we have the Torrens system in Australia, and I think that protects us to a certain extent, that all land under the Torrens system is fundamentally like registered to a person. And if you buy land, it's actually your land.
Hang on, but we have leasehold land here, and we have Canberra and Northern Territory.
Yeah, we have some, and a lot of Australia is Crown leasehold, if it hasn't been turned into Torrens land. But if you are actually in Torrens land, where the government has extended a town, I think you are part of Australia. Whereas in America, it seems to be like once you get into these private communities, you can contract away so many of your rights in a weird way. So in terms of public development, there's this new thing they're pushing in the US where they want their own police, they want their own security, they want their own services, so they can basically be like little mini sovereign states. And they'll be trying to do it here.
Damn, I've met a sovereign, that's it. And I knew that they had communities, as in like communities for indigenous populations and stuff. I knew that sort of stuff existed in America. And yeah, the sovereigns are just numpties, man. They had stickers and stuff over their licenses that they don't have because they're traveling, right? Like fucking okay, whatever. Didn't mean to swear on the recording. But yeah, so with the whole like developing thing, trying to bring it back onto theme and on topic, the only thing that I can think of is it in Malaysia where they had the big construction company and it was really corrupt and it had like a letter and a number in the title. With these sorts of issues, like I could imagine like normal corruption, like obvious corruption, with like these private companies and the government can happen. Like it did with, I'm assuming that's what happened with Malaysia. I think it was Malaysia, somewhere like that. Like, how do you go about putting limitations on private entities when it gets to a point, I guess, where the private entities are worth more and probably have more sway than a government? Because I imagine in a fair few countries that's the case. And potentially for us at Blyton too, depending on how rich these OG families are. Like, how do you go about dealing with the fact that there's probably entities out there that are bigger and stronger than government?
And they probably already have representatives inside the government. Like there'll be people who are on the town council who are part of the old families, part of the old family group, or somehow obliged to them. Yeah, there's stuff in corruption studies around there being sort of optimal levels of corruption, because a lot of our anti-corruption discourse is based on this sort of Puritan idea about just stamping it all out and getting rid of it. And there's a lot of more realistic stuff where people say there's going to be, if you got to recognize there is going to be corruption within the system, you keep it to the manageable staff, you keep it to the, the local council member who accepts a gift in order to fast track a planning approval. And it's not good, but you realize that sort of stuff's going to happen, and sometimes you need to let that stuff happen in order to chase the bigger fish, to chase the situations where the stuff is more serious. Steph said, is this the issue in America with government officials giving construction companies the job when they have a place in the board? There's one of the problems with America is the revolving door between Congress and officials and industry. And people have proposed that there should be like a cooling off period of 5 years, that since when you leave government, either as an elected member or as a senior advisor, there should be at least 5 years before you get appointed to a multi-million-dollar job in industry. And people like the FDA, there's been a real problem with people who are doing approvals on drugs, and then as soon as the drug's been approved, they're now got a $1 million contract with one of the drug companies. So yeah, this issue of what is considered corruption and what is just considered to be one of the perks of government, it's a really serious one. And I think here you've got that issue of the actual agreement that sets up this. It's crucial for the government to have control over the contract, the relationship which sets up the development corporation. It's crucial that it's accountable, that it's public and it's open. And the development corporation is going to want to modify the terms of the contract so it's none of those things, that it's not open so people can't see what's going on, that it's not public. And there's going to be this tension. And this is one of the things the reading for this week talks about. And they use the example, I think, of there's one in South Africa. And there's been a few examples where it's a bit of a deal with the devil to get your development done. But we've always done that. We've always gotten rich benefactors to build children's hospitals. And we know, they're terrible people. We know they've done all these terrible things to get rich. But if they're going to give us a large amount of money to set up to do something that's a benefit to the community, we end up not only allowing them to do it, but we often end up sort of giving them titles and fawning over them and saying what great people they are because they're so charitable and whatever else, and giving them all this praise, all the time knowing that there's all these dark secrets underneath what it does. So it's all about compromise, as difficult as that is.
Mafia in construction.
That's like the amount of, with the construction union that's gone on, with the criminal activity in the construction, the CCEMEU, forgotten all the acronyms. Yeah, and as Carly said, Epstein put a lot of money into charitable stuff. This is the reason why there's so many famous people seen with Epstein. I'm not quite sure whether it justifies being on the Lolita Express, like certain people have been. Looking at you, Donald and Bill. But Epstein had a real interest in science education. So he plowed so much money into science education that a lot of people were like, yeah, okay, you want to build a new science lab for my impoverished school? Yeah, I'll do a photo opportunity with you. And it comes back to haunt you later on. Carly's also mentioned Prince Andrew. Well, basically the whole royal family. The whole royal family exists on plunder. And people say, oh, but they do so much charitable work. And it's like, yeah, we compare about the stuff that the state pays them. The state could pay that money to the charities and cut the middle person out of that, really. Controversial anti-monarchist rhetoric coming out here. But it's happened for such a long time. It is so ingrained in our culture that we allow the wealthy to pay a little bit back in terms of charity, and we end up having to be grateful for it, because the alternative is that we just don't get the children's hospital. And then we say we've got to tax everyone more to build the children's hospital, and then you lose government because people don't like being taxed. But I think the high watermark is Elon Musk saying, don't tax our businesses at all, and let the billionaires solve the problems because we're the smart people. He's like, yeah, you can imagine how fairly Elon would decide what were social problems that were worth managing and dealing with. I think he thinks like private schools are the way to go. The way to fix education is to have private schools for everyone.
I mean, they taught us the actual spelling words for NAPLAN when I went to a private school for a few months. So, they're onto something. You definitely score better. I actually forgot what I was going to say after I came off mute. Hang on. Like, for us, I'm assuming most of us who are watching this, right? Like, it's a privilege to have this level of education and to be able to do it. Like, I'm below the poverty line. Thank God Austudy exists. And even my brother will say, like, he gets the shits about paying tax. But, when I tell him that it's me that it benefits, he's like, yeah, but I'd like to have the choice to actually give you the money. He owes me like $1,500, okay? So like, no, he would not have the choice to give it to me. All right, but it was a nice sentiment. So like, if you had a private company that did actually want to look after the things that the government doesn't want to, or, a lot of public opinion, I guess, is that certain issues get a lot of funding, but the funding doesn't make it all the way to the people that need it type situation. I'm trying to be tactful here, but I live in Cairns. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, like how potentially is there like some sort of middle ground where entities who do have their own interests but still want to be benevolent for issues that the government doesn't seem to think are very important? Is there a middle ground that could make it work? I mean, taxation needs to stay for sure. But yeah, say for example, if Elon Musk was potentially correct, which I don't think he is, and we were a little bit like those ancient times, like how you see on Facebook about how it used to be an honor to be like the richest 100 people and pay tax and all of that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you'd have to like restructure how everyone thinks, I think, first. But like, is there even an opportunity to have a benefit of private funded things in a Western country, like to help them?
I think the way we tend to go with these is to have a really robust community board that oversees projects. Now, I'm not sure, that can often end up just creating more sort of red tape and bureaucracy. But the idea is you have people who are elected from the community, who represent the community, who are also in a decision-making role in the board. So for this Blighton Development Corporation, we would have elders from the local First Nations community there. We'd have people who work in the charities who are working with the homeless people. You'd have a really broad range of people so that the decisions aren't always stacked in the favour of government or the corporations. And at the very least, if there was wrongdoing, there's more chance of someone making it public because you've got a lot of more visibility than until they actually manage to corrupt all the community members that are part of this. You have more opportunity to keep it more accountable, I think is the only way you'd really have to go. But it's tricky stuff. And if you want to run outside of like this development, if you want to run a youth diversion scheme for kids, you're not going to get continuing government money for it. You might get McDonald's to fund it, but then all your t-shirts are going to have McDonald's on it. Is that something you want? Is that a compromise you're prepared to make? And sports teams have been doing this forever, but there is that, corporations will see stuff as beneficial to their image. They'll see the stuff as free advertising, but sometimes there is that sort of sponsorship that can come through that can also get things done that you can't ordinarily get done. And yeah, the problem with bureaucracies is how little money makes it through. I mean, if you do an analysis on the money from that people buy daffodils for, for cancer research, just the stuff that goes to universities, but without looking at the way in which the charity organisations take money out of it. But once it hits a university, like 25% of the money that's raised goes to Chancery. Doesn't even go on the research that's being funded. It just goes to pay whatever universities are prioritising their money on. And the further you go, and people don't know that when they're buying their daffodil. They're saying buy a daffodil for cancer research and for the vice chancellor's salary and for the big party the vice chancellor holds at the end of the year and for building a new building on a campus. You don't get the breakdown of the money that goes into your charitable donation and in the way in which it gets spent. So yeah, those are other problems that you end up with when very little of the money that gets raised from these charitable collaborations ends up where it's supposed to go. So anyway, lots of issues that you could talk about or write about if you wanted to write this one up. I will update the sim. I'll do that straight away in terms of the rankings. That was the one thing I think I forgot to actually update this week. Everything else should be clear and ready to go.
I did have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had a look at a couple of the squares relevant to this week's things, and they've been claimed by another organization. Now, I think I read something about that. Like if I solve a problem in their square, there's something that happens.
Let me have a quick look.
I think that was in like a tertiary goal, if you picked that for your tertiary goal.
Okay. There are so many pages, I don't even remember what I read half the time.
Yeah, the only real relevance of game relevance of the coordinates is that there's a tertiary goal that it gives you a bonus victory point if one of them happens to be on your HQ.
Okay.
Which is a bit of a gamble.
Oh yeah, because last week's didn't have a location for our hotspots.
Yes, someone forgot to do that. But I don't think anyone had picked their tertiary goal at that point, so it didn't really matter at the end of the day.
Also, the purchase upgrades that we have, the adding of the know-how, morale, intelligence, what's the P one? Prestige and efficiency, that is from the next week's sim, not that week's. Okay.
I will put all those mods in when you've made your purchases for this week. Just updating the order, so that's all now the right order.
Lovely. And do you recommend this week or leave it for another week to do the open locations? The city improvements.
I think probably the city locations, you're going to need to collaborate with someone because you're going to need like 3 teams to collaborate, or at least 2 teams to collaborate to get one of those because you don't have enough workers on your own. The open locations might be worth it if there's something you want to do, like you want to change, want to cash in some assets for victory points or those sorts of things. They do sort of functional things. But one of the things that comes out of the crisis is that you'll get another worker.
Okay.
Crisis. That's gonna mean that you'll have 3 workers, and if you wanted to put all 3 of them into one of those town improvements, you could do it.
And that would be for the week, and then the following week I would have my 3 workers again.
So, I mean, the first thing I thought of would be still to keep your 2 workers doing what we're doing now, and then use one and then liaise with other groups to do it that way, potentially.
could potentially do that.
Yeah.
Or deceptive, and they could say, yeah, I'll put one on there as well, and you go first, and then they decide not to do it, and you've wasted the work.
I know vaguely around about where Stephanie lives. Like, if she wants to start pulling that, admin is coming for some kneecaps.
I'll see you in about 5 hours then, Carly.
Yeah. My car didn't start this morning, so it might be a bit more. I need to get a Greyhound ticket.
The hitchhiking revenge.
Yeah,
Mind you,
exactly.
my boyfriend was in Cairns yesterday and I picked him up from the airport today, so that was a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, true. I could drop a smoke bomb from a QantasLink plane or something. I don't know. Yeah. I'll take your whole city down with me.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll just level Townsville and start again, okay?
Well, I mean, we tried with the floods. You want to know how many sales I got out of that? Because I used to sell tiles that would be like for insurers and that sort of stuff. Bro, you guys made me so much commission. You know, feel free to do that again.
Yeah, well, we all got money from the government, so
Oh, then I lose in the long run. Shucks. I'm gonna go because I'm just talking absolute hot air and I need to get some sleep. So I will see you guys next
have
week.
your turn first so I can have my turn.
Yeah, I'll do that and then I'll go have a nap. I
Yeah.
can do that just for you.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye.
Bye.
Okay, guys. See you in 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.